What if I told you that the greatest atrocities in human history were not committed by monsters, not by psychopaths or fanatics, but by ordinary people? People who loved their children, paid their taxes, and worried about their promotions. People who, in a different context, you might even call good neighbors. This is a deeply unsettling idea. It violates every story we've ever been told about good versus evil. We want our villains to be exceptional, to be diabolical geniuses with grand, malevolent plans. It's comforting in a way. It allows us to put evil in a box, to label it other, to assure ourselves that we are nothing like them. But what if the most dangerous evil isn't the one that announces itself with thunder and lightning, but the one that creeps in quietly, dressed in paperwork, justified by procedure, and carried out by people who are simply doing their jobs? This is the central paradox of what the political philosopher Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. It's the terrifying truth that monstrous acts don't always require monstrous intentions. Sometimes all they require is a failure to think. This isn't a concept from a dusty old book. It is the single most urgent psychological and social threat of the 21st century. Because the systems that create this thoughtless evil bureaucracy, corporate culture, deference to authority, have now been supercharged by technology. Algorithms that make decisions affecting millions of lives, social media platforms that reward reaction over reflection, and a world of such overwhelming complexity that just following orders has become a universal survival strategy. The conditions for the banality of evil are not only still with us, they are more pervasive, more efficient, and more invisible than ever before. This is a story about how good people can be recruited into doing terrible things, not by being persuaded to be evil, but by being persuaded to stop thinking. And the most chilling part, your brain, my brain, is wired to make us vulnerable. The moment we believe we are immune is the moment we are most at risk. Understanding this phenomenon is no longer an academic exercise. It is an act of self-defense for your own mind. It is about understanding the price of intellectual surrender and the daily, deliberate courage it takes to remain a thinking, judging human being in a world that would profit from you becoming anything but. To truly grasp this haunting idea, we have to travel back to a courtroom in Jerusalem in 1961. There, sitting in a glass box, was Adolf Eichmann, one of the principal architects of the Holocaust. And in the audience watching him was a woman who had every reason to see him as a monster. Hannah Arendt was a German Jewish philosopher. She had studied under the great minds of her generation, people like Martin Heidegger and Karl Jaspers. She was brilliant, deeply immersed in the philosophical traditions that defined Western thought. And then, in 1933, her world was shattered. The Nazis came to power. She saw her professors, her colleagues, the intellectual elite of Germany capitulate with horrifying speed. She was arrested by the Gestapo, interrogated, and managed to escape by a hair's breadth. She fled Germany, eventually making her way to America as a stateless refugee. She had lost friends, family, and her homeland to the Nazi machine. For her, this was not theoretical. It was brutally personal. So when she took an assignment from the New Yorker to cover Eichmann's trial, she expected to come face to face with pure ideological evil. She expected a villain of Shakespearean proportions, a man whose every word would drip with anti-Semitic hatred and sadistic intent. Instead, what she found baffled and disturbed her. Eichmann wasn't a monster. He was a clown, a mediocre, unimpressive bureaucrat. He wasn't driven by some profound, demonic hatred. He was driven by a desperate desire for a promotion. He spoke in clichés, in the mindless, prepackaged jargon of the Third Reich. He called it officialese. He talked about the extermination of millions of people as if he were discussing shipping logistics or a complex administrative problem. He wasn't stupid, but he was, in Arendt's devastating phrase, thoughtless. He seemed utterly incapable of thinking from the standpoint of somebody else. He had so thoroughly internalized the rules and directives of the system he served that he had abdicated his own capacity for moral judgment. He wasn't wrestling with his conscience. He didn't seem to have one. He had outsourced it to his superiors. Arendt listened to him for months. She listened as he described organizing train schedules to send hundreds of thousands of people to their deaths. He took pride in his efficiency. He was a good manager. He was just doing his job. He insisted, only following orders. Arendt realized something that chilled her to the bone. The system that had murdered her people was not primarily staffed by foaming-at-the-mouth fanatics. It was staffed by thousands of Adolf Eichmanns, ambitious, unthinking careerists who were more concerned with pleasing their bosses than with the human consequences of their actions. This led to her most famous and most controversial conclusion. She wrote, "The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil." Eichmann's evil, she argued, was banal. It was commonplace. It was the evil of a man who had so completely surrendered his mind to the system that he had become a mere cog, incapable of independent thought. The backlash was immediate and vicious. She was accused of defending a Nazi, of blaming the Jewish victims, of being a cold, unfeeling intellectual. Her friends disowned her. She was ostracized by the very community she belonged to. But she refused to back down. She had seen something essential about the nature of modern evil, and she knew that understanding it was the only way to prevent it from happening again. She had sacrificed her reputation and her relationships to reveal an uncomfortable truth, that the line between good and evil is permeable, and that the greatest defense against crossing it isn't goodness or righteousness, but the simple, difficult, and constant activity of thinking. Eichmann's crime, she ultimately concluded, was not his hatred. It was his thoughtlessness. He had committed the ultimate crime against humanity by renouncing the one quality that made him human, the ability to think and judge for himself. And in doing so, he allowed himself to become an agent of unimaginable horror. At the exact same time Hannah Arendt was observing the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem, a young psychologist at Yale University was conducting an experiment that would provide the terrifying scientific proof for her philosophical insight. Stanley Milgram was also Jewish, and he was haunted by the same question that drove Arendt. How could so many ordinary German citizens have participated in or stood silently by during the Holocaust? Was it something unique to the German character? Or was there a darker, more universal truth about human nature at play? To find out, he designed one of the most famous and disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. He put an ad in the New Haven newspaper, recruiting ordinary men for a study on memory and learning, teachers, engineers, postal workers, laborers. They were offered $4 for an hour of their time. When a volunteer arrived at the lab, he was introduced to two people. The experimenter, a stern man in a gray lab coat holding a clipboard, and another volunteer, a mild-mannered, likable man named Mr. Bird. Man named Mr. Stern, a find. Wallace, who was actually an actor, through a rigged draw, the real participant was always assigned the role of teacher, and the actor was assigned the role of learner. The teacher was taken to a room with an imposing shock generator. It had a row of 30 switches, starting at 15 volts, labeled slight shock, and going all the way up to 450 volts, labeled with a chilling XXX. The teacher's job was to read word pairs to the learner, who was strapped into a chair in the next room. Every time the learner got a word wrong, the teacher was instructed to deliver an electric shock, increasing the voltage by 1 level for each subsequent error. The experiment began. The learner, as planned, started making mistakes. The teacher flipped the first switch, 15 volts. Then 30, then 45. At 75 volts, the learner grunted in pain. At 120, he shouted that the shocks were becoming painful. At 150, he cried out, "Experimenter, get me out of here. I won't be in the experiment anymore." I refused to go on. This was the critical point. The teacher would often turn to the experimenter, looking for guidance, expressing concern. The experimenter, impassive, would respond with a series of 4 pre-written prods. "Please continue." If the teacher hesitated again, "The experiment requires that you continue. Then it is absolutely essential that you continue." And finally, "You have no other choice. You must go on." The learner's protests grew more frantic. At 285 volts, he let out an agonized scream. At 330 volts, there was an eerie silence from the other room. He was no longer answering. The experimenter instructed the teacher to treat the silence as a wrong answer and continue delivering the shocks. All the way up to 450 volts. Before conducting the study, Milgram polled his colleagues, a group of psychiatrists at Yale. He asked them what percentage of participants they thought would go all the way to 450 volts. They predicted that only a tiny fraction, perhaps 1 in 1,000, a truly psychopathic fringe would do it. They were wrong, devastatingly wrong. In the initial experiment, 65% of the participants, 2 out of every 3 ordinary people from New Haven, delivered the maximum, potentially lethal, 450-volt shock. They weren't monsters. They weren't sadists. The recordings of the sessions are harrowing. You can hear them sweating, trembling, stuttering, laughing, nervously. Many argued with the experimenter, pleaded with him to stop. They would say, "I'm not going to be responsible for what happens to him." The experimenter would calmly reply, "I'm responsible." And with that simple transfer of responsibility, most of them would turn back to the machine and continue. They had entered what Milgram called the agentic state, a mindset where a person sees themselves as an agent for carrying out another person's wishes. In that state, their own conscience, their own moral compass, was simply switched off. They were just doing their job. They were just following orders. Later replications of the experiment conducted in different countries, in different decades, including a U.S. study by Jerry Berger as recently as 2009, have found similar, disturbingly high rates of obedience. Milgram's experiment revealed a chilling truth. The man in the lab coat has more power than we could ever imagine, and under the right situational pressures, the capacity for Eichmann-like thoughtlessness lies dormant within almost all of us. So what is this powerful mechanism that can make a good person do a terrible thing? What is happening inside our brains and inside our societies that creates this vulnerability to banal evil? It operates on 3 distinct levels: the neurological, the systemic, and the social. And understanding how they interlock is the key to defending against them. First, let's look at the neurological wiring. Your brain evolved over millions of years for survival in small, hierarchical tribes. In that environment, obedience to authority wasn't a moral failing. It was a life-saving adaptation. When the tribal leader screamed, "Run," the ones who stopped to ask why were the ones who got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. Deference to the recognized authority figure is a deeply ingrained primal instinct. A 2011 study by researchers at University College London used brain scans to watch what happens when people are ordered to do something. They found that when we are following orders, the activity in the parts of our brain associated with empathy and personal responsibility, the prefrontal cortex, is literally dampened down. It's as if the brain says, "This decision isn't mine, so I don't need to engage the moral circuitry." Think of your brain like a company. The prefrontal cortex is the CEO, responsible for complex decisions and long-term consequences. The amygdala is the head of security, responsible for immediate threat response. When a clear authority figure, the man in the lab coat, the boss in the corner office, the political leader on the screen issues a command, it's like an emergency directive from the board of directors. The CEO, your thinking brain, gets bypassed, and the security team, your reactive brain, takes over. You enter Milgram's agentic state. You're no longer the author of your actions. You're just an instrument. This system worked brilliantly on the African savannah, but it misfires catastrophically inside a modern bureaucracy or a complex corporation. That brings us to the second layer. The economic and systemic incentives. Modern systems are designed to maximize this neurological vulnerability. The defining feature of any large organization, whether it's a corporation or a government department, is the diffusion of responsibility. An engineer designs a small component. A programmer writes a few lines of code. A manager signs off on a report. A marketing team creates a campaign. Each person is responsible for only a tiny, compartmentalized piece of the whole. No single person feels responsible for the final outcome. Consider the Wells Fargo scandal, where employees created millions of fake bank accounts to meet aggressive sales quotas. Were these thousands of employees all inherently corrupt? No. They were ordinary people trapped in a system that created a perverse incentive. Their job, their mortgage, their ability to feed their families depended on hitting a target. The system punished those who asked moral questions and rewarded those who just did the job. The banality of evil doesn't need villains. It just needs KPIs, key performance indicators. This is exponentially amplified by technology. Think of a content moderator for a major social media platform. Their job is to review thousands of images and videos a day, making split-second decisions about what constitutes hate speech or violence, based on a constantly changing 27-page rule book. They are measured on speed and accuracy. The system is designed to turn them into thoughtless rule followers. They aren't thinking about the societal impact of their decisions. They are thinking about not getting fired. The algorithm itself is the ultimate thoughtless bureaucrat. A YouTube engineer in 2015 wasn't thinking, "How can I radicalize young men?" They were thinking, "How can I increase user watch time?" They designed a recommendation algorithm that optimized for that one single metric. The unforeseen consequence was that the algorithm learned that extremist content is highly engaging, and it began creating a pipeline to radicalization. The system, in its thoughtless pursuit of a rational goal, produced a monstrously irrational outcome. No one was the bad guy, and that's the problem. The third and final layer is the social and cultural amplification. We are social animals. We take our cues from those around us. Christopher Browning's book, Ordinary Men, documents the horrific actions of Reserve Police Battalion 101, a unit of middle-aged German men carpenters, salesmen, not die-hard Nazis, who were tasked with carrying out mass shootings of Jewish civilians in Poland. On the day of their first massacre, their commander, Major Trapp, a man who was not a monster, wept as he gave them the orders. He explicitly told the men that if any of them didn't feel up to it, they could step aside. In a group of 500 men, only about a dozen did. Peer pressure, the fear of being seen as a coward, the desire to fit in with their comrades. Once they started, it became easier. Each act of violence desensitized them to the next. They were in a situation where the normal rules of morality had been inverted. Here, participation in mass murder was the socially accepted norm. This is where intelligence can become a liability. You might think that smarter, more educated people would be more resistant. Arendt saw the opposite. It was Germany's intellectual class that was among the first to embrace Nazism. Why? Because intelligent people are experts at rationalization. They are better at constructing sophisticated, internally consistent arguments for why the unthinkable is actually necessary, why the immoral is actually for the greater good. They can build a more convincing intellectual cage for their own conscience. In a corporate or political culture, this becomes a status game. Being a team player, signaling loyalty to the group's consensus, is rewarded. Asking the hard, uncomfortable moral questions is punished. It gets you labeled as difficult, as disruptive, as not on board with the mission. And so, even people who have private doubts learn to keep silent. It becomes clear that the banality of evil is not just a psychological problem. It is a sociological one. It is a disease that thrives in groups, spreads through conformity, and is incubated by systems that reward obedience over independent thought. To see how this mechanism plays out in the real world, we have to look at the stories of ordinary people caught in the gears of history. These are not just historical anecdotes. They are diagnostic case studies of a recurring human pathology. Our first case, the archetype, is Adolf Eichmann himself. Before the trial, the world imagined him as a shadowy mastermind, a spider at the center of a web of evil. The reality was profoundly, disappointingly mundane. Born in Germany, Eichmann was a mediocre student and a failed traveling salesman for an oil company in Austria. What he craved, more than anything, was belonging and importance. He found it in the Nazi Party. He wasn't a rabid ideologue. He was a joiner. He was good at organizing, at paperwork, at logistics. These skills propelled him up the bureaucratic ladder. When he was put in charge of Department IVB-4 of the Reich Security Main Office, the department responsible for Jewish affairs and deportations, he approached it not as a moral crisis, but as a monumental administrative challenge. He spoke of the final solution in terms of transport quotas and train schedules. He was proud of his efficiency, of his ability to process 5,000 people a day. During his trial, he famously declared that he had lived his whole life according to Immanuel Kant's moral imperative, a shocking claim from a mass murderer. But he had twisted Kant's philosophy to mean not that you should follow your own conscience, but that you should follow the law of the land, whatever it may be. He had outsourced his conscience to the Führer. The consequence of this thoughtless obedience was the meticulously organized murder of millions. The chilling modern parallel is the tech executive optimizing an algorithm for user engagement, knowing full well that the most engaging content is often the most divisive and hateful, but seeing it only as a technical problem to be solved, a KPI to be met. Our second case study takes us to a forest in Poland. In July 1942, the men of Reserve Police Battalion 101 were not elite SS fanatics. They were middle-aged reservists from Hamburg dockworkers, truck drivers, clerks. Most were not even members of the Nazi Party. They were ordinary men, their commander, Major Wilhelm Trapp, gathered them before dawn and, with tears in his eyes and his voice choking, informed them of their assignment. They were to round up the 1,800 Jews from the village of Yosvar, shoot the men of working age on the spot, and deport the women and children to a death camp. He then made an extraordinary offer. Any of the older men who did not feel up to this task could step aside. Out of 500 men, fewer than 15 accepted. The rest, driven by a cocktail of peer pressure, deference to authority, and fear of being seen as weak, marched into the village. The massacre that followed was a chaotic, intimate butchery that lasted all day. The men, sickened by their task, drank heavily. Yet they did it. This was their initiation. Over the next 2 years, the men of Battalion 101 would be directly responsible for shooting at least 38,000 Jews and deporting 45,000 more to Treblinka. They became routine, efficient killers. Christopher Browning, who studied them, concluded they were not driven by bloodlust, but by a powerful desire not to break ranks and separate themselves from the group. The Modern Parallel is a team at a data brokerage company, where each employee performs a small, seemingly innocuous task collecting location data, packaging it, selling it to a third party without asking about the final use, all while looking to their colleagues for social proof that what they are doing is normal and acceptable. Third, we traveled to Rwanda in the spring of 1994. For generations, Hutu and Tutsi communities had lived side by side, intermarrying, sharing meals, attending the same churches. Then, for years, the Hutu-led government saturated the airwaves with propaganda. Radio stations like RTLM relentlessly dehumanized the Tutsi minority, calling them Anyenzi, the Kinyarwanda word for cockroaches. When the genocide began, the orders were not just handed down from on high. They were distributed through local mayors and community leaders. The act of killing was framed as a civic duty, as umuganda or community work. Hutu farmers, teachers, even priests were handed machetes and told to kill their Tutsi neighbors. Refusal was not an option. It meant being labeled a traitor, which was a death sentence. But for many, it was also an opportunity. It offered social status, a chance to prove loyalty, and the ability to loot their neighbor's property. In 100 days, 800,000 people were slaughtered, often by people they knew their entire lives. The evil was not just banal, it was intimate. It was a husband killing his Tutsi wife to save himself. To save himself. It was a priest betraying the parishioners hiding in his church. This is the banality of evil at its most terrifyingly personal, fueled by dehumanizing language and social pressure. The Modern Parallel is an online mob, whipped into a frenzy by viral narratives, descending on a target, seeing not a complex human being but a one-dimensional caricature, a Karen, a cock, a shill, a cockroach, and participating in their digital destruction with a sense of righteous community. Our final case brings us to the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq in 2003. The photos that emerged from that prison shocked the world. Naked prisoners stacked in a pyramid, detainees being led on a leash, a hooded figure standing on a box with wires attached to his hands. The initial narrative was simple. These were the actions of a few bad apples, a group of sadistic rogue soldiers. The reality, as revealed by subsequent investigations, was far more complicated and far more in line with Arendt's theory. The soldiers involved, like Lindy England and Charles Grainer, were not trained interrogators. They were young army reservists with little training put in charge of a chaotic, understaffed, and dangerous prison. They were working the night shift, with little supervision in a high-stress environment where they were told the prisoners were the enemy. They received ambiguous directives from military intelligence and private contractors to soften up detainees for interrogation. In this pressure cooker, With no clear moral guidance, a toxic microculture developed. The abuse started small and escalated. It became normalized. The fact that they were taking photos, smiling and posing, is not a sign of pure sadism, but a chilling indicator that they believed what they were doing was, on some level, acceptable within their group. This was not a case of a few bad apples. It was a case of a bad barrel, a systemic failure of leadership, training, and oversight that created the perfect conditions for the banality of evil to flourish. The modern parallel is the team of gig economy managers, tasked with overseeing a massive distributed workforce through dashboards and metrics, making decisions to deactivate drivers or warehouse workers based on cold algorithmic data, completely insulated from the human cost of their efficient management. Hannah Arendt and Stanley Milgram could not have possibly imagined the world we live in today. They were concerned with the analog bureaucracy of the mid-20th century, the world of filing cabinets, typewriters, and chain-of-command memos. We now live in a world where those same mechanisms of thoughtless obedience and diffused responsibility have been automated, scaled, and accelerated to an unimaginable degree. The banality of evil has gone digital. We see this playing out in real time all around us. Take the opioid crisis that has killed over 500,000 Americans. Was that the result of a single evil drug lord? No. It was the result of a banal, corporate evil, distributed across a vast system. Pharmaceutical executives who approved misleading marketing campaigns, focusing on profit targets while ignoring the data on addiction. Sales representatives, motivated by massive bonuses, who pushed doctors to overprescribe, using company-provided scripts that downplayed the risks. Doctors who, overwhelmed with patients and trusting the information from the sales reps, wrote the prescriptions. Each person in the chain could rationalize their role. The executive was maximizing shareholder value. The sales rep was just doing their job, and a lucrative one at that. The doctor was trying to alleviate their patient's pain. No single person felt like a monster, but the cumulative effect of their compartmentalized, thoughtless actions was a catastrophe of monstrous proportions. We see it in the very architecture of our digital lives. For years, the engineers and product managers at major social media companies have been engaged in a relentless quest to optimize for one thing: engagement. How do we keep users scrolling, clicking, and sharing? They discovered, as a matter of pure data, that the most engaging content is often the most emotionally charged. Content that sparks outrage, fear, and tribal animosity. The recommendation algorithms they built were not programmed with a political agenda. They were programmed to give users more of what kept them on the platform. The consequence, which we are now living with, was the algorithmic amplification of extremism, conspiracy theories, and social polarization on a global scale. The people who built these systems were not evil. They were smart, well-paid engineers solving a technical problem. They were just doing their jobs. But the system they created is arguably one of the most powerful engines for thoughtlessness ever invented. And here is what Arendt couldn't have known. Technology has created a new, terrifying form of authority: the algorithm. The algorithm is the perfect banal evildoer. It follows its programming with perfect fidelity. It has no conscience. It feels no empathy. It cannot think or exercise judgment. It simply executes its orders. An Amazon warehouse algorithm that tracks worker productivity and automatically generates termination notices for those who fall behind is a perfect example. A manager doesn't have to fire the person. The system does it. Responsibility is laundered through the code. A facial recognition system used by law enforcement, trained on a biased dataset, may incorrectly flag innocent people from minority groups. But the officer using the system is just following the data. The programmer who wrote the code was just fulfilling a contract. The system operates, and no single human feels accountable for its mistakes. The numbers bear this out. A 2018 study from MIT found that false information on Twitter spread 6 times faster than the truth. Why? Because it's often more novel, more shocking, and more emotionally resonant. Our brains, wired for threat and novelty, are drawn to it. The platforms, designed for engagement, amplify it. We have created a global information ecosystem that is structurally biased against truth and reflection. It is an ecosystem that rewards reaction, not thought. We've gone from the banality of evil in a filing cabinet to the banality of evil in the cloud, operating at the speed of light and capable of influencing billions of minds simultaneously. The new man in the lab coat isn't a person. It's a push notification. It's the recommendation engine, and its authority is more subtle, more personalized, and more pervasive than anything Milgram could have tested in his Yale laboratory. The truly terrifying thing about Arendt's discovery isn't what it says about Nazis in the 1940s or participants in a psychology experiment in the 1960s. It's what it says about you. It's what it says about me. It's a diagnosis of a fundamental vulnerability in the human condition, one that is being exploited more systematically today than at any point in history. The scariest part? We're all susceptible, no matter how smart, educated, or morally upright we believe ourselves to be. Let's make this personal. Have you ever found yourself in a meeting at work, disagreeing with the direction things are going, but you stay silent because everyone else, especially your boss, seems enthusiastic? That's the pressure of authority and social conformity. The same forces that acted on the men of Battalion 101. Have you ever shared an article or a headline on social media that made your blood boil, that confirmed your deepest beliefs about the idiocy of the other side, without taking 30 seconds to verify if it was even true? That's your amygdala being hijacked, bypassing your thinking brain, a small act of intellectual surrender for the rush of tribal validation. Have you ever used corporate jargon or bureaucratic acronyms to describe a difficult situation, like right-sizing the workforce instead of firing people, or managing externalities instead of polluting a river? That's Ekman's officialise, the linguistic anesthetic that distances us from the human consequences of our actions. In the last month, you have probably, without even realizing it, deferred to an algorithmic recommendation. What movie to watch? What news to read, what route to drive. You trusted the system. You followed its orders. Most of the time, that's harmless and convenient. But it trains you in a habit of thoughtless compliance. Each small act of outsourcing your decision-making to a black box system weakens the muscle of your own judgment. Here's the cruel paradox. Intelligence and education do not make you immune. In fact, they can make you more vulnerable. Why? Because if you're smart, you are a master of rationalization. You can construct more sophisticated, more eloquent, and more convincing justifications for why you are just doing your job. Why this particular case is an exception. Why the system's goals are more important than your personal misgivings. Arendt was horrified that it was Germany's finest minds, its professors and philosophers, who provided the intellectual scaffolding for Nazi ideology. They didn't see themselves as evil. They saw themselves as sophisticated thinkers who understood the sweep of history. The moment we think, I'm too smart to fall for that, we've already begun to succumb. Our belief in our own intellectual superiority becomes the very blind spot that allows the banality of evil to take root. This isn't a personal failing. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. conserve energy, seek social acceptance, and follow the path of least resistance. But we no longer live in the world our brains were designed for. We live in a world where the path of least resistance leads off a moral cliff. To resist this pull, we have to understand what was at stake for the woman who first warned us. What did it cost Hannah Arendt to tell the world this unwelcome truth? When Eichmann in Jerusalem was published in 1963, the firestorm was immediate. She was not just criticized, she was vilified. She was accused of being a self-hating Jew, of having no love for her people. Her friend, the renowned scholar of Jewish mysticism, Gershom Scholem, wrote her a furious letter, accusing her of betraying her community. Their decades-long friendship was shattered. She was publicly denounced by organizations like the Anti-Defamation League. Reviewers called her arrogant, cold, and heartless. Imagine the immense pressure she was under. She was a refugee who had found a safe harbor. She was a member of a community that had just endured the most unspeakable trauma in its history. And she was telling that community something it absolutely did not want to hear. That the evil that had destroyed them was not satanic or otherworldly, but terrifyingly, depressingly human. That the perpetrator was not a demon, but a man distinguished only by his sheer thoughtlessness. It would have been so much easier for her to write a simple story of good versus evil, to confirm the narrative that everyone wanted and needed to believe. It would have been easier to join the chorus of condemnation, to paint Eichmann as the monster everyone saw. But she refused. She believed that to truly honor the 6 million dead, you had to understand the precise nature of the system that killed them. To simply demonize Eichmann was to let everyone else off the hook. It was to let ourselves off the hook. It made the Holocaust a story about monsters, rather than a warning about what ordinary people are capable of when they stop thinking. She spent her final years defending her work, enduring the isolation, refining her ideas. Her sacrifice was not just about getting the historical record right. It was about defending the very principle that separates a human being from an automaton. The capacity for independent thought and moral judgment. She paid a terrible personal price to warn us that this capacity is fragile, that it can be surrendered, and that the consequences of that surrender are catastrophic. Her entire ordeal forces us to confront the central haunting question that animated her work. What does it actually mean to think? For Arendt, thinking was not the same as being smart or knowledgeable. It wasn't about having a high IQ or a PhD. It was an active, moral, and deeply personal process. She described it as the silent dialogue we have with ourselves. It's the voice in your head that asks, "What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Can you live with the person you become if you do this?" This inner dialogue is our conscience. It's what allows us to judge right from wrong. Eichmann's great crime was that he was incapable of this dialogue. There was no one home. He wasn't talking to himself because he had completely identified with his role in the system. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a man. He saw a functionary. The stakes of ignoring Arendt's warning are immense. Individually, when we surrender our capacity to think, we lose our moral agency. We become, in her words, nobodies. We become hollowed out, mere cogs in a machine we don't control, executing a program we didn't write. We trade our humanity for the comfort of not having to make difficult choices, and collectively, the stakes are civilization itself. And argued that a society of non-thinkers is the fertile ground for totalitarianism. Democracy requires a citizenry of thinking, judging individuals. When we stop, we create a vacuum that can be filled by any ideology, any authority, that promises certainty and relieves us of the burden of thought. Today, those authorities are not just charismatic leaders. They are opaque algorithms and unaccountable corporate systems. We are at risk of building a world run by thoughtless processes, a world where responsibility has been so thoroughly diffused that when the next catastrophe arrives, there will be no one to blame, because everyone was just doing their job. This has happened before. It can and it will happen again, unless we choose, deliberately and daily, to resist. But within this sobering diagnosis lies a powerful source of hope. If the banality of evil is caused by a failure to think, then the antidote is simple, though not easy. We must choose to think. It's not a superpower. It's not a gift reserved for geniuses. It's a practice. It's a habit. It's a muscle. And like any muscle, it strengthens with use and atrophies with disuse. For too long, our modern world has been designed to encourage atrophy. Our information environment, our workplaces, our political systems, they are like escalators for the mind, designed to carry us along with minimal effort. Choosing to think is choosing to take the stairs. It's more difficult. It's slower. It requires conscious effort, and it often leads to discomfort. The tragedy is that intellectual surrender often feels like liberation. To stop wrestling with ambiguity, to stop questioning the consensus, to simply accept the narrative you're given and follow the rules. It feels good. It's a relief. It gives you a sense of belonging and certainty. Thinking, on the other hand, is hard. It means living with doubt. It means being willing to be wrong. It means having the courage to stand apart from the group. It means accepting the discomfort of not knowing. That discomfort is the price of admission to a fully human life. It is the feeling of your moral conscience at work. The hope lies in the fact that this is a choice. We are not doomed to be Eichmanns. We are not hardwired for thoughtlessness. We can build the habits of mind that serve as a permanent defense against the banality of evil. And it starts not with grand, heroic gestures, but with small, daily practices. So, how do we do this? How do we build the muscle of independent thought in a world that wants us to be intellectually passive? It comes down to a toolkit of concrete practices. This isn't a list of vague ideals. It's a training regimen for your mind. You're scrolling through your feed at midnight. You see a headline that makes your blood boil. It confirms everything you believe about your political opponents. Your thumb is already moving toward the share button. You know that feeling, right? That surge of righteous certainty that everyone needs to see this, to know how right you are. This is where what I call the 60-second circuit breaker becomes your best friend. It's dead simple, but it's a game changer. The moment you feel that surge, that anger, that absolute certainty, you stop. Physically stop. Put your phone face down. Close your eyes. Take 3 deep breaths in for 4 seconds. Hold for 7. Out for 8. It sounds ridiculously simple, I know. But here's the science behind it. Your amygdala, that ancient security guard in your brain, treats a disagreeable political opinion as if it's a physical threat. You are literally in fight or flight mode. Your prefrontal cortex, the thinking, rational part of your brain, goes offline. Those 60 seconds of deep breathing are just enough time to calm the amygdala and allow your prefrontal cortex to reboot. Stanford researchers found that even a 10-second pause can dramatically reduce the sharing of misinformation. 60 seconds gives you back control of your own mind. It's the space between stimulus and response. And in that space lies your freedom. Let's call it the Eichmann test. In your work life, you are constantly given tasks, directives, and goals. The next time you're assigned a project, especially one that makes you feel even a tiny bit uneasy, I want you to pause and ask yourself a different set of questions. Instead of asking, "What's the most efficient way to complete this?" ask, "What are the human consequences of this task if it's done successfully?" Instead of asking, "What do I need to do to please my boss?" ask, "Could I defend this action to the people most affected by it?" This simple reframing shifts you out of the agentic state, out of the mindset of a functionary, and back into the mindset of a moral agent. It forces you to connect your small, compartmentalized action to its real-world impact. Eichmann never did this. He only ever asked about efficiency. This practice ensures you never make that mistake. The third practice is the certainty alarm. Our culture valorizes certainty. We see it as a sign of strength and conviction. Arendt saw it as a sign of thoughtlessness. True thinking is a process of wrestling with complexity and ambiguity. Certainty is the end of that process. It's a mental state of coasting. So, from now on, I want you to treat the feeling of absolute certainty as an alarm bell. The moment you feel 100% sure about a complex issue, the moment you feel there is no credible argument on the other side, that alarm should go off in your head. It's a signal that you have probably stopped thinking. It's a prompt to get curious again, to actively seek out the smartest person who disagrees with you and try to understand their perspective. Certainty is a cage for your mind. This practice is the key to breaking out. Next is the language detox. Eichmann, as Arendt noted, spoke almost entirely in clichés and bureaucratic jargon. He used officialese as a shield to protect himself from the reality of his actions. We all do this. We use corporate speak, political labels, and empty buzzwords to avoid precise human-scale thinking. Your practice is to become a jargon detector. Once a day, I want you to identify one piece of jargon you used or heard and translate it into plain, simple human language. Right-sizing becomes firing people. Collateral damage becomes killing innocent civilians. Optimizing user experience becomes making this app more addictive. This practice is not just about being a clearer communicator. It's about forcing your brain to confront the reality behind the euphemisms. It strips away the linguistic anesthetic and makes moral judgment possible again. Here's a practice for group settings. The Devil's Advocate Protocol. The banality of evil thrives on groupthink and conformity. To combat this, you need to formalize dissent. The next time you're in an important meeting where everyone seems to be agreeing, try this. Say, "This seems like a good idea, but to make sure we're not missing anything, let's pause for 10 minutes and try to argue against it. What are the strongest reasons we shouldn't do this?" Or even better, formally assign someone the role of devil's advocate for the duration of the meeting. Their job is not to be difficult. Their job is to stress test the group's thinking, to find the blind spots. This protocol gives people social permission to disagree. It changes dissent from an act of rebellion into an act of service to the group. And it's one of the most powerful tools against collective thoughtlessness. Another powerful tool is the proximity principle. Evil becomes banal when it is committed at a distance. Eichmann sat in an office in Berlin, organizing train schedules. The horror was an abstraction. He was insulated from the consequences by layers of bureaucracy. In your own life, you need to deliberately shrink that distance. If you are a software developer, don't just read usage data. Go out and talk to the actual human beings who use your product. If you are a manager, don't just look at spreadsheets. Spend a day working alongside your frontline employees. If you're making a decision that affects a community, get out of your office and walk through that community. The closer you are to the human consequences of your actions, the harder it is to remain thoughtless. Proximity is the enemy of banality. And finally, the practice of I don't know. We live in a world that pressures us to have an immediate opinion on everything, from geopolitical crises to celebrity gossip. This pressure leads to intellectual laziness. We grab the nearest pre-packaged opinion from our political tribe and repeat it. The most courageous and intellectually honest words a person can say are, I don't know enough about this to have a strong opinion. I want you to practice saying this at least once a day. When a friend asks you what you think about the latest outrage, resist the urge to perform an opinion. Just say, you know, I haven't looked into that deeply enough. I'm not sure. Watch what happens. You feel a sense of liberation. You are reclaiming your right not to have a thoughtless opinion. You are giving yourself the space to actually think. Now, listen. I know what you're thinking. That's a lot of practices. You're looking at this list and feeling overwhelmed. You're thinking there's no way you can do all of this. And you're right. You can't. Not all at once. Here's what actually works. Week 1. You pick one. Just one. The certainty alarm, maybe. Or the language detox. Something small. Something that takes 5 minutes or less. You do that one thing. Every day. For 7 days. You're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to build a habit. Week 2. You keep that first habit and you add one emergency tool. The 60-second circuit breaker is perfect for this. You don't use it every day. You use it when you need it. When you're triggered, when you're about to share something thoughtlessly, when your amygdala is in the driver's seat. Week 3. You're ready for deep work. The Eichmann test. The Devil's Advocate protocol. These are harder. They take real time and social courage. But by week 3, you've built momentum. You've proven to yourself that you can do this. Week 4, you make it social. You try the proximity principle. You find one other person at work or in your friend group to be an accountability partner. Someone you can check in with and ask the hard questions. Because this isn't a solo journey. You can't resist the banality of evil alone. Nobody can. By day 30, something has shifted. You catch yourself pausing before sharing. You notice other people's jargon and it makes you uncomfortable. You've changed your mind about something significant. Your friends are asking you how you stay so calm about everything. That's not magic. That's neuroplasticity. You've built new pathways in your brain. You've trained yourself to think when everyone around you is reacting. And here's the thing. These practices seem small because they are small. That's the whole point. A 5-minute daily habit practiced for 6 months rewires your brain more than a 2-hour weekly practice. Consistency beats intensity every single time. Hannah Arendt didn't become a great thinker because of one big, heroic decision. She became who she was through 1,000 small choices to question, to analyze, to engage in that silent dialogue with herself when it would have been easier to go along with the crowd. These practices are your 1,000 small choices. But individual practices, as crucial as they are not enough. We are swimming in a sea of systems that are designed to promote thoughtlessness. To truly solve this problem, we need to change the structures of the sea itself. We need systemic changes that make thinking the path of least resistance. On a policy level, this means fighting for things like algorithmic transparency. We have a right to know how the black box systems that shape our lives and our information diets make their decisions. The European Union's Digital Services Act is a step in this direction, requiring large platforms to disclose how their recommendation algorithms work. We need robust whistleblower protection laws so that individuals inside corporations and governments who see banal evil taking root have the courage to speak up without fear of retaliation. And we need to fundamentally rethink education, moving beyond rote memorization and toward curricula that explicitly teach critical thinking, media literacy, and the intellectual humility to question one's own assumptions from a young age. We also need a revolution in platform design. For 2 decades, the tech industry has been obsessed with frictionless experiences. The goal has been to make everything faster, easier, and more seamless. This has been a disaster for human cognition. We need to start designing for friction. Imagine a social media platform that, before you can share an article, makes you answer 3 basic questions about its content, proving you've actually read it. Imagine a user interface that, instead of an infinite scroll, has a natural stopping point, prompting you to pause and reflect. Imagine a system that downranks content from sources that have a track record of publishing false information and that rewards nuance and intellectual humility, perhaps, by boosting comments that say, "I'm not sure, but here's a thoughtful question." These aren't impossible dreams. They are design choices. They require prioritizing psychological health and democratic discourse over raw engagement metrics. But the most profound changes we need are cultural. We need to fundamentally shift what we value as a society. Right now, we valorize confidence and certainty. We mistake it for competence. We need to start seeing intellectual humility as a sign of strength. We need to create a culture where saying, "I was wrong," or "I changed my mind," is not seen as a weakness, but as the ultimate demonstration of intellectual integrity. We need to celebrate the questioners, the dissenters, the people who slow down the conversation to ask the hard questions, instead of dismissing them as disruptive. This means consciously choosing to consume long-form, nuanced content over short-form, emotionally charged hot takes. It means finding and supporting communities, both online and off, that are dedicated to thoughtful dialogue rather than tribal warfare. We have to make thinking cool again. We have to make it a status symbol, the way that having a strong opinion, any opinion, is today. These are not heroic acts. They are ordinary practices of intellectual hygiene that become extraordinary only when everyone around you has stopped doing them. The daily choice to think for yourself in a world designed to do your thinking for you is, in itself, a profound act of resistance. And it will be difficult. It will be uncomfortable. There is a genuine loneliness to independent thought. When you step out of your echo chamber, when you stop participating in the tribal rituals of outrage, you will feel like an outsider. Your friends might not understand. You will lose the comforting warmth of the herd, but you will gain something far more valuable: your own mind. You will find a deeper, more authentic connection with others who have also chosen this path. You will earn your beliefs rather than simply inheriting them. Your small daily choices to pause, to question, to verify, to listen will compound over time, not just into a set of intellectual habits, but into a character defined by integrity and moral courage. The price of intellectual freedom, like any freedom, is eternal vigilance, not a grim, anxious vigilance, but a joyful, curious vigilance. The vigilance of a mind that is fully alive. So how do you know when you're starting to slip? How do you recognize the subtle pull of functional stupidity in your own life? The banality of evil doesn't announce itself with a villain's monologue. It arrives quietly, disguised as common sense, as professional responsibility, as just the way things are done. The next time you find yourself absolutely certain about a complex social or political issue, that's a warning sign. The next time you use a label woke, MAGA, sheeple, shill to dismiss a person or an entire group of people, that's a warning sign. The next time you find yourself saying the words, "I'm just doing my job," or "it's not my decision to make," that's a warning sign. The next time you feel a powerful wave of social pressure in a group to conform to a consensus you don't quite believe, that's a warning sign. The next time you share something online fueled by a rush of outrage, without reading past the headline, that's a warning sign. These are the moments when your brain is trying to take the shortcut, to outsource its thinking, to slip into the agentic state. And in that moment of recognition, you have a choice. It's a binary choice, with no middle ground. You can surrender your mind for the comfort of certainty, for the warmth of the tribe, for the ease of not having to think. Or you can choose the more difficult path, the path of doubt, of curiosity, of intellectual independence, the path of errant. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot simultaneously be a thinking individual and a thoughtless member of the herd. You must choose. On that choice rests not only your personal dignity and integrity, but our collective future. The life on the other side of this choice isn't some utopia of perfect clarity. It's a life of wrestling, of questioning, of constant learning. But it is an authentic life. It is the deep satisfaction that comes from genuine understanding, not borrowed conviction. It is the relief of letting go of the burden of having to be right all the time. It is the joy of connecting with other people as complex human beings, not as caricatures. It is the quiet, unshakable integrity of being a person who, as Arendt would say, is fit to live with themselves. It is the feeling of being a fully conscious human being. Here's what happens next, and I need you to actually do this. Not just nod along and forget about it in 5 minutes. Pause this video. I'm serious. Pause it right now. Grab your phone. Open your Notes app. Or grab a piece of paper. Write today's date at the top. Now, write down one belief you hold about a group of people you disagree with. Politically, socially, culturally. Something you feel certain about. A belief you would argue for. Write it as a simple statement. I believe people who support X are. Cut it. Because of Y. Got it. Good. Now set a timer for 5 minutes. Your job for the next 5 minutes is to find the most articulate, humane, and intelligent argument from someone within that group, explaining their own position. Not a straw man. Not a caricature from your side. Find their best thinker, their most compelling writer, their strongest case. After 5 minutes, answer this one question in your notes. What would it mean for my identity if their motivations were not evil or stupid, but based on a different set of legitimate values or life experiences than my own? Not what it would mean for the world. What it would mean for you. That's the test. That's where the real work happens. One of two things will happen. Both are victories. First possibility, your original belief survives. You considered the strongest counterarguments honestly, and your belief still holds up. Congratulations. You now hold that belief with earned confidence, not inherited certainty. you can articulate the other side's view fairly. You have done the intellectual work. Arendt was talking about second possibility. Your belief is challenged. You find a point you can't easily dismiss. Your certainty cracks. That discomfort you're feeling, that's the feeling of your mind expanding. That's you choosing truth over comfort. That's intellectual courage. Changing your mind isn't weakness. It's the core process of all human progress. But most people will do this once and stop. Don't be most people. Here's your 7-day protocol. Day 1 is today. You just did the 5-minute challenge. Day 2. Before sharing anything online, do a 60-second fact check. Search the headline, plus the word debunked. Day 3. Say I don't know out loud at least 3 times. Resist the urge to perform an opinion. Day 4. Find one person who disagrees with you and ask, help me understand why you believe that. Then just listen. Don't debate. Day 5. Do the 5-minute belief challenge again on a different topic. Day 6. Review everything you shared online this week. Ask yourself, what did I accept without verification? Be honest. Day 7. Write 1 paragraph. This week I noticed this pattern in my thinking. Moving forward, I'm going to do this differently. Specific pattern. Specific change. I know what's about to happen. You're feeling motivated. You're about to close this video. Your brain is moving on. So here's your accountability mechanism. Comment below. Right now. Tell me one thing. The belief I'm testing is, or I'm committing to the 60-second rule for 7 days. The act of public declaration makes you 65% more likely to follow through. And as you read the other comments, you'll see you're not alone. You'll see your community. Finally, write down these 5 emergency questions. When you feel that flush of certainty, that righteous anger, stop and ask. 1. How do I know this is true? Sources, not feelings. 2. Who benefits from me not thinking carefully about this? Incentives. 3. What would change my mind? If the answer is nothing, you're not thinking, you're believing. 4. Would I bet $1,000 that I am correct? Skin in the game forces honesty. 5. What would Hannah Arendt ask me right now? These 5 questions can break the spell of the banal in under a minute. They will save you, but only if you use them. If you're feeling uncomfortable right now, good. If this has made you question something you held as certain, that's not a sign of weakness. It's the first spark of intellectual courage. Most people who started this journey with us have already clicked away. They went back to the comfort of the scroll, the warmth of the echo chamber. The certainty has already returned for them. But you are still here. You are still listening. That means you are not looking for comfort. You are looking for truth. You are not looking for validation. You are looking for growth. That's rare. That's valuable. That's exactly what Hannah Arendt risked everything to defend. In a world designed to profit from your intellectual surrender, the simple act of thinking carefully is a radical act. In a system that rewards emotional reaction, the choice to pause is a revolutionary one. In a culture that mistakes confidence for competence, the courage to say, I don't know, is heroic. You will not be perfect at this. You will slip up. You will fall into the grip of thoughtlessness again. That is not failure. The practice isn't perfection. The practice is noticing and correcting again and again and again. And here's what you need to understand. This isn't just about you. Every time you choose curiosity over certainty, you give other people permission to do the same. Every time you change your mind based on new evidence and admit it, you model for others that intellectual flexibility is strength. Every time you pause before sharing outrage, you break a link in the chain of viral misinformation. You're not just protecting your own mind, you are defending the very possibility of collective wisdom in an age of algorithmic stupidity. Your friends will notice. Your family will notice. At first, they might think you're strange. Why are you always asking for sources? Why don't you just pick a side? But then, something will shift. They'll start coming to you. How do you stay so calm about all this? How do you figure out what to believe? And you will get to say, let me tell you about the banality of evil and a woman named Hannah Arendt. That's how this spreads. Not through virality, but through one person showing another that there's a different way to be. So, here's what I am asking you to do. Share this, but not with everyone. Don't send it to the people who are addicted to certainty, who treat disagreement as betrayal. They are not ready. Share it with one person. One person who you know values truth more than being right. One person who is already frustrated with the toxic tribalism and is looking for a way out. Frame it simply. This challenged me. I'm curious what you think. That's it. An invitation, not a sermon. Because curiosity is how this all begins. Let me end with this. We are living through the most sophisticated, most systematic attack on human cognition in history. Every algorithm, every platform, every political strategist is getting better and better at pushing our emotional buttons, at bypassing our rational minds, at making us thoughtless. AI will make this exponentially more powerful. The only defense we have is the one Arendt identified 80 years ago. The daily, conscious, and sometimes difficult choice to think for ourselves. This is no longer academic. This is about retaining your humanity in a world designed to mechanize it. Your mind is the last and most important frontier. Will you defend it? So here is my final question for you, and I want you to answer it in the comments. What's one piece of jargon or a cliché you use at work or in your political life that you are willing to question this week? Don't say all of them. Pick one. Be specific. Make it real. And then do the work. Because here is the truth. Hannah Arendt understood in her very bones. Intellectual freedom is not a gift. It is not a birthright. It is something you earn every single day in 1,000 small choices. The choice to pause instead of react, to question instead of accept, to think instead of feel, to seek truth instead of comfort. Let's commit to being the kind of people who stand fast when everyone else has stopped thinking. Let's be the resistance Arendt died trying to create. Starting today. Starting now. Who's with me?